Good evening in the church and those that might be watching this later. Appreciate your attention to the Word of God. We had a good service, this morning. Brother David, I've got it on YouTube and on Facebook. And I thought it was a good thought this morning. Because choices need to be made and people need to be brought aware of the fact that it has to be done. And you don't have to do anything today to be lost except do nothing. And nobody, he mentioned this morning, people have the idea that the devil's in hell. And the demons in hell keep coming out and giving us problems. Nobody's ever got out of hell. Nobody has ever left there. Devil's never been there. One day he will be. And all of this comes from Hollywood and some books over the years, but not the case. The devil is free. And that's the reason we have so much trouble down here. I'm going to sing a song, or try. Every once in a while I get the courage to try this. But I'm going to try it tonight, and hopefully I'll be able to get through it. The title of it's I Call It Home.
Bless him, Lord.
Bless him, Jesus.
Somewhere beyond the grave, there is a land where Jesus went to prepare by his own hand. And for the saved by grace, there is a resting place, and in a few more days it will be mine. Some call it heaven, I call it home. Some call it call it paradise, somewhere beyond the skies. Some call it heaven, I call it home. Someone said you can't go back home again. Things will not ever be as good as they've been. I've got good news for you. When heaven comes into view, one glimpse and you will know the best is yet to come. Some call it heaven, I call it home. Some call it dreaming, let me dream on. Some call it paradise, it's somewhere beyond the sky. Some call it heaven, I call it home. Some call it paradise, somewhere beyond the skies. Some call it heaven, I call it home. Amen. Amen. All right. Turning your Bibles tonight, I want to read a few verses over in 2 Samuel chapter 12. Verse 19, I'm going to read from verse 19 on down and look at some things tonight about when we have to say goodbye. 2 Samuel 19, verse 23. But when David saw that his servants whispered, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said unto his servants, Is the child dead? And they said, He is dead. Then David arose from the earth and washed and anointed himself and changed his apparel. He came into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he came to his own house, and when he required, they set bread before him, and he did eat. Then said his servants unto him, What thing is this that thou hast done? Thou didst fast and weep for the child while it was alive. But when the child was dead, thou didst rise and eat bread. He said, While the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, Who can tell whether God will be gracious to me that the child may live? But now he is dead. Wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. Thank you. The story here concerning what we read here is after David sinned with Bathsheba, a child was conceived. David tried to hide it as best he could, but he ended up being responsible for the death of her husband, Uriah. Yeah. And he thought he was able to keep it hid. But Nathan the prophet came in and pointed a finger at David and proclaimed God knew it all along. He said, Thou art the man, the one that sinned. But God told him also, he said, the child that's going to be born, he said, it's going to die. Yeah. I was thinking of this a while back, or just a few hours ago as I was driving down here. Somebody might think that was harsh of God. The child has not done anything. He's not responsible for either his mother's or his father's sin. Why should he pay the penalty for him? Well, if you think death and going home to be with the Lord is a penalty, then I guess it is. But I prefer to think of the fact that this child, we don't know what his future would have held. Many of David's children and grandchildren were wicked and ungodly men. Yeah. Would it be better for him to have lived and sinned and find God to consign him to the hell that anybody that was unrighteous in those days went to? I firmly believe David is true. He's given us a principle here. Children that die at a young age, I don't care if the child is born at any age, they are with the Lord. And David said, He'll not come back to me, but he said, I'll surely be going home with him. Which shows David had a confidence in God. He had a belief and a confidence in an afterlife that was going to be something after what he was going to be living here. He said, he's not returning here. He said, I will go back to him. Amen. The Apostle Paul to the church at Thessalonica, we read this verses here concerning the rapture of the church, but verse 13 makes us something here. Paul said, I would not have you ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep. But he said that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. Death has touched most of the members of this church here. And today it's touched us, and I'm not going to deal with it too much, but my sister went on to be with the Lord just a few hours ago. Yeah. But if we have no more of a hope than what someone that has lost and without God has, then the sorrow can overtake your heart. Yeah. David here has a belief. He has and I think about the term goodbye. We say goodbye. Sometimes we have the opportunity to do it before a person actually dies, but sometimes we don't. But we're saying goodbye, and it's not something that's unique to me or unique to anybody. Yeah. As I say again, it touches each one of us. Death is something you're not going to be able to escape sooner or later. In the book of Genesis, if we go there, before we have 3 people born in this earth, you got Cain and Abel and Seth. But before Seth is ever born, you got one of those brothers killing the other. Yeah. Death has happened in this family. Not only that kind of a death, it's a violent death with a brother against brother. You know, we all have one thing in common. You go to Genesis chapter 5. I always call this the obituary chapter. There's one thing common in that lineage and list of people that are given there. They all were born and they all died except for one. The one exception is Enoch. The Bible said Enoch walked with God and was not because God took him. He did not have to face death. And one of these days, the church is going to leave here, and some in that day will not have to experience death. You say, how do you know that? Well, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, in verse 51, as Paul closes out this great chapter on resurrection, he said, behold, he uses those terms to wake us up. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, we're going to be find out that the trumpet's going to sound. He said the dead shall be raised incorruptible and we shall be changed. Some of us, if the Lord was to come tonight, some of us are going to be changed. Death is not going to be our final or our something we're going to have to face. Death is a common denominator of all mankind. Well, racial problems and circumstances, let me make it plain. It don't make no matter whether you're black or white. Red, green, or in between, all are going to die. And reason we have the fact of that, the book of Romans tells us a reason that we can be assured that everyone is a sinner on the top side of this earth is because it all died. Romans chapter 5 verse 12, let me read this. Paul says, wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. He says, so death passed upon all men. Why? For that all men have sinned. Amen. We understand here that what David is looking at, he understood it like people should understand today, that after death, no one was returning back. Right. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in zombies. Yeah. I don't believe one demon's ever got out of hell because they ain't been there yet. Hollywood has clouded the spiritual perception of the church today. We believe some of these ignorant things. Once a person's in hell, he's there eternally. He's not getting out except for one thing. And that's the great white throne judgment you find in the book of Revelation. Amen. They are in turn cast in the lake of fire. But David understands here that he was going to go to that child. The child was not coming back. We know that Jesus did raise people from the dead. We know that the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter did raise people from the dead. God allowed them back, but the person cannot return of his own will from the dead. Yeah. As David pointed out many times this morning, whatever your decision is with Jesus Christ today is going to seal your whole eternity. And our short lives down here, as he illustrated, it's like a vapor, or it's like a flower that all of a sudden flowers and blooms and it's dead. This little ephemeral life that we spend down here is going to seal our fate for all eternity, and we have trouble with it. Yeah. All I know is that no one is returned from the dead by his own will. That rich man in Luke chapter 16, he begged Abraham to send someone to his family. You know something? He never asked for him to send him back because he knew that wasn't going to happen. We're saying goodbye down here, and it's hard. Even though that we might be saved, Paul makes it plain to that church there that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope, which does not mean we don't have sorrow. No one can face the death of friends and family without it having sorrow in their heart. Yeah. David had a faith in resurrection that was past here, and he had a confidence that he was going to be reunited with that child. By the way, I used some beautiful songs about heaven, but I don't like them to have children walking on the streets of gold or whatever. Ain't no children in heaven, best I can understand. Think about it for a moment. I believe everybody that goes into heaven is going to get a resurrected body that's of a mature body. Thank you very much. Abraham. The Bible said that Abraham had a faith in resurrection to the point he was going to offer his son Isaac. God said to take thy son, thine only son Isaac, up on a mountain that I'm going to show you, and he said to sacrifice him there. Abraham didn't argue with God. He packed up and he went. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but this is what it says of Abraham in Hebrews chapter 11. It said, by faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. He that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. Well, that's not the end of it, because God had already told him of his seed, all the earth was going to be blessed, and he was going to give him a son. This is verse 18, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. God made him a promise. Isaac was going to be the seed. He already had a son. But listen, God said, take thy son, thine only son Isaac. Well, Abraham had another son. But Hagar the Egyptian, Ishmael. But God didn't even consider him. He'd already give his plan and his purpose and what he was going to do. But this is verse 19, accounting. This is Abraham. That word accounting, it's a term to say he took it to the bank. Accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead. Amen. From whence also he received him in a figure, which means Abraham put his faith in God. He as much as knew. He knew if he plunged that knife into Isaac, God was going to raise him up and make it as if he'd never died. But yet we know that for the most part that's not going to occur. We say goodbye to so many of our loved ones. David did it with the faith in God. He said in verse 23, now he's dead, wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back? No. No matter what I do, I cannot bring my mother back. I cannot bring my sister back. I cannot bring my father back. All I can do is to say goodbye and have faith in God that it's not an eternal separation. Yeah. David said, I'll go to him. He's confident in some circumstances here. Psalm chapter 17, verse 15. I don't know when David wrote this, but this is what he said. He said, as for me, I will behold thy faith in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. You know, the hard part in saying goodbye is it comes with a separation. It might in a natural realm. We say goodbye. Sometimes it's a short one. Sometimes it might be for a longer period of time. They might be going closer or farther away. I have a son and family in Texas. And that's a pretty, country folks, that's a pretty fair piece, folks. And my daughter and son, they're in Atlanta. That's not that far away. But let me tell you something. You say goodbye to family. We just said goodbye to Keith and Michelle just a few days ago when we separated down in South Carolina. We were there going back to Georgia, and we came here. The separation's still the same. Yeah. Well, I said goodbye to my mother over 28 years ago, and it still seems like it's yesterday. I've mentioned several times I have a picture of her when she was in her teens. And every once in a while, I've got it in my office, and I'll be wandering around. I'll see the picture of Mama over there, and I'll say, Lord, tell Mama hello. Yeah. If it's her birthday, I say, tell my mother happy birthday. Well, birthdays, I know, you can say what you want. Birthdays ended when we die down here, but it's just a thought that I'm thinking about. Yeah. Mother's Day, we can't get together. I can't take my mother out to dinner. But I say, Lord, tell my mother happy Mother's Day. Yeah. I do not know what all people up there have a knowledge of down here, but I try to keep her informed on things. Well, you can say it's stupid if you want to, but I'm confident that like David here, one of these days we're going to be reunited. There is a separation now that occurs. And it's one of the harsh realities of saying goodbye. But if we do it down here, I don't like to say goodbye to family. Yeah. We don't know how long it'll be before we see them again. You know, my sister never really got over my mother's death, but she's together with her now. You say, you don't know that. I know that. Yeah. I know as well as I'm standing here, you say, well, you can't prove it. You can't prove it ain't. Now, people today that want to be looked into a science book to see if they can find God, you won't find God there. Yeah. But you can find him in this book.
That's right. There you go.
And it's scientifically sound even too, by the way.
Yes.
Number two, if they're saved, they have a better life. When we look at the circumstances, this is from the book of Job. I just got through reading Job here just a few weeks ago. Job said, man that is born of a woman is a few days and full of trouble. Mm-hmm. Most of us can say amen to that. Yeah. He said, he cometh forth like a flower and is cut down. He fleeth also the shadow and continueth not. One of his, I'll say this and I'll call him friends, one of the friends that come to visit Job. He did say some good things. He said, man is born into trouble as the sparks fly upward. If you never sat around a campfire, you don't understand what that means, but you sit with a campfire and you can see those sparks as they go up, but they disappear shortly. Like David's talking about that steam this morning. You know, the rich man and Lazarus, you have a perfect example of this here. When they both awake in paradise or in the afterlife. I ain't got time to explain how the paradise changed when Jesus was resurrected. But this is what it said in Luke chapter 16. He said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus. He may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I'm tormented in this flame. Now some religions don't like hell, they don't like punishment. But you won't convince this man of it. He said, I'm tormented in this flame. Yeah. But so Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things. Likewise, Lazarus, evil things. Yeah. But now he's comforted, thou art tormented. So I can't complain about my life that I've had down here. We've had some ups, we've had some downs. But all I know is that the life that we'll have is better than the decaying body that came with us with our birth. You know, we're going to be changed into one that's without fault, without problems, without pains or any of those things. People still refer to life as being over the hill. Apparently there's a point there that they figure you're over the hill. Let me tell you something. You don't get over this hill. You start downhill the minute you're born. When the doctor smacks you on the backside, you're on your way to the grave. Yeah. Don't think of it like that, but let me tell you something. This journey that we're in is downhill, and you better make some arrangements for it while you're here, or when they say goodbye to you, you ain't going to like where you're going to be going to. This baby, it died right shortly after its birth, but it's going to have a body, and I'm persuaded of this, and I believe faithfully in it. It's going to have a body that will never die. It's never going to be sick again. We don't know what it died from, but we know one thing. And you say, well, God's at fault for taking that child's life. It was a blessing. Yeah. There's a lot of life. Job said, listen, read Job when he's going sitting on the ash heap. He said, cursed be the day that I was born. Yeah. He said, let it be cursed the day that they said a man-child is born. Cursed was the day I was ever born. Well, I can't say that. My life has not been that bad, but let me tell you something. Some people's are. The Apostle Paul knew what it was like to struggle with a failing earthly body. And he had a yearning for a better and an eternal one. We know what his choice is. Let me tell you something. Not many of us want to die. There's a phrase that goes around that preachers use. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And I don't disagree with that. And they're not looking for death. Paul wasn't exactly looking for death, but he yielded himself to God. This is what he said in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Yeah. He said, if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor. Yet what shall I choose? I wot not. Or I don't know what to choose. He said, I'm a strait betwixt two. He said, I'm in a narrow place. Yeah. Between these two choices. What's the choice? Having a desire to depart, to be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. Yeah. And it was very needful. He wrote this letter from a Roman jail. He wrote the book of Philippians. He wrote the book of Ephesians. He wrote Colossians. He wrote 2 Timothy and 1 Timothy. He wrote a lot from that jail, and we have the benefits of it here. Amen. Yes, and he said, I'd like to go and get out of this jail, get out of this stinking prison. He said, it's more needful that I stay here. And he sacrificed himself in his choice for God. I believe God would honor his choice, whatever he wanted to do. But he chose to stay and suffer. You know, when we look at this is 2 Corinthians chapter 5. I always have trouble saying that word. He said this concerning resurrection. He said, I know that if the earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, he's talking about death, we have a building of God and a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Amen. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with a house which is from heaven. He's not wanting to die, but he wants that heavenly body. And I don't blame him. If so be that being clothed, we shall not be found naked. Folks, we have a very earthly tabernacle. We have a tent that's got holes in it. It's flapping at the, we're just it's a lot of us in bad shape. And you say, well, I'm not old yet like you are. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I've had aches and pains since I was 30 years old. I used to lay block and brick and stone. I had a bad back with the chiropractors. And some of the things I'm going to do through today is because of what I went through back then. You can't tell me that just because you don't hurt just because you're old. Yeah. You have a better life, a better body than the one that you have down here. We just don't want to say goodbye, though. Thirdly, one is happy. But what of the other? What do you mean? Well, I want all my family to remain with me forever. But that's impossible in the flesh. Yeah. I have a picture. I don't know who took it because it's my dad and all of us. My two sisters and my two brothers and myself. Just us. And I look at it sometimes. And I say, would to God we could go back there. The physical infirmities that I know that we've suffered, we weren't suffering them then. All I know is when we look at the circumstances and we look at those that were brought back that we was talking about a while ago that Jesus healed or Jesus raised from the dead. What about those that came back? I know what their families thought. Over in Mark chapter 5, you've got Jairus' daughter. And Jesus healed her and said, this is what it said, straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was aged of 12 years. They were astonished with a great astonishment. Yeah. I would be too. Amen. In Luke chapter 7, here we've got another circumstance. He that was dead sat up, began to speak, and he delivered him to his mother. There came a fear on all, and they glorified God, saying, this is a great prophet, that a great prophet is risen up among us, that God hath visited his people. Now, these were surprised at the circumstances. That's that widow woman there that Jesus come across that was, they were having the funeral procession. He's in a coffin. This widow's bemoaning the death of her child. And I can understand that. I've not had to go through that. And hopefully, by the grace of God, I will not have to bury one of my children. Amen. Yeah, I hope not. But Jesus just he said, yeah, hang on here. And he just went over and touched him. And he got up out of the coffin. And I'm pretty sure his mother was tickled to death. The other, John chapter 11, you've got the picture of Lazarus. He's the most notable of them because more is told about him and the circumstances than any of the others that were risen from the grave. This is verse 32 of John chapter 11. Then when Mary was come where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Yeah. Amen. Now he knows, excuse me, he knows he's going to raise him from the grave. When he left where he was at, his disciples said, he looked at the disciples and said, Lazarus sleeps. He said, we're going to go down and wake him up. They said, well, if he's sleeping, Lord, he's doing all right. He said, no, you don't understand. He's dead. He'd been dead 4 days by this time. So Jesus knows what he's going to do. But here we find out that he's troubled and the death of somebody that he loved touches him. And I know that Jesus purposely didn't come and heal Lazarus. Mary and Martha both said, Lord, if you'd have come down, he said, he wouldn't have died. But there's a greater glory attached to the fact that Jesus didn't heal him. He's going to raise him from the dead. Sometimes we don't understand what gives God the greater glory. And that's what we're supposed to do. We glorify God. Paul said in our body or in our spirit, he said it's all God's. Verse 35, it says, Jesus wept. Yeah. Then said the Jews, behold how he loved him. Now, both of these sisters had faith in the resurrection, but they were more interested in the present, not the future. And when Jesus had to remind them that he said, I am the resurrection.
Amen.
And the life. And they said, well, we know, Lord, into things or whatever, said he's going to get a resurrection. He said, I am the resurrection.
Amen. Yes.
They needed to understand something. Jesus is more concerned with the future than the present. Yeah. I need to know that he's in charge of these things. Anybody that he would today, I don't expect anybody coming out of the grave. I said you can't do it of your own free will, but God could make it happen if he wished. We wish that our loved ones might stay with us, but the greatest sorrow of death is the separation. And if only it's just maybe just for a few years. Like I said, my mother's been 28 years.
Yeah.
Sometimes it seems short, sometimes it seems long. Over the years, Linda's lost both her mother and her father, 2 sisters, 3 sisters rather, her brother and her mother, Death touches us all, and it touches us again and again and again.
Amen.
Now, nothing happens to us outside of the care and love of Jesus, period. Paul thought it better to remain with the Lord, or to be with the Lord than it was to remain here. He said that's the better part. Well, what do we look at? We know Lazarus here is going to be reunited with his sisters, and they're happy as can be. But what we often don't think about is there'll come a time in the future
He's got to die again.
they're going to stand at the grave again, or Lazarus at one of theirs.
Yeah.
I don't know what it'd be like to have to bury one of my family twice.
No.
Don't even want to do it once.
Yeah.
But when we look at everyone that Jesus raised from the dead died again.
Yeah. Amen.
Now listen, for the present, it was a great circumstance. But all I know is they had to die again. Not only that, though, this is the thing with Lazarus. He becomes a testimony, along with the rest of them, of Jesus' authority. To the point, this is what it says, this is John chapter 12, verse 9. I'm going to close here. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he'd raised from the dead.
Amen.
But the chief priests consulted they might put Lazarus also to death.
Yeah.
Because that by reason of him, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. Essentially, David's asking this morning about what would you take in exchange for your life, or what's your life worth, or what do you consider your life worth? I asked Lazarus, was it worth having to die twice that you could bring people to Jesus? I think today sometimes we forget that we have a responsibility to be a witness.
Yeah. We do. God help us.
We have to say goodbye to others, but we have to be able to witness a good witness at the same time. That we sorrow not even as others which have no hope.
Yeah.
If we have a hope as a child of God, we better manifest that hope to everybody. We say goodbye, but we better do it in a manner that puts faith and trust in God, and not like, take those heathen priests that Elijah had to deal with. They're cutting themselves and stomping all over the things and doing everything, and they can't wake their God up. Our God's alive and he's awake.
Amen.
He knows. By the way, the Bible says that Lazarus, that the angels ushered him into Abraham's bosom.
Mm-hmm.
It says of that rich man, the rich man died, and in hell he lifted up his eyes. I don't know who he had dragging him there, but I guarantee it wasn't angels. You know, in Spanish, I learned my Spanish from a Cuban. My teacher in high school was Cuban, so some of my Spanish is different than other people's Spanish. Goodbye is normally adios. Adios, it means goodbye. But there's another term in Spanish, and there are other terms meaning the same thing. It's hasta luego, which is see you later. It's an informal see you later. And I like that better.
Yeah.
Goodbye seems so final, but I'll see you later has a better thought to it. In any case, we're supposed to say goodbye not like some unbeliever, but we have to have confidence that we're going to see them later.
Yeah.
We don't do that,
Yeah.
then we failed in our responsibilities. David, I think of him. He said, that child I will not see again on this earth, but he said, I will see him again.
Amen.
I will go to where he is.
Amen.
And one of these days, I shall go where my mother and father, hopefully they're both there, I believe that. Now I have a sister there, uncles, aunts, family. Linda's mother, father, sisters, brother. We're having to hope that we'll see them again. How do we say goodbye? Well, we need, if we're a Christian, we have to say it in the same way that David did, with some confidence that this is not the end of it.
Yeah.
Amen.